My guest today is back for the third time, and if third time's the charms remains to be seen. He is the runner of Arizona Ghost Riders on YouTube. Please welcome Sam T. And this is the 100th episode, if you can
Wow.
believe it. Yeah. And it was the very
Congratulations.
first, thank you. You were the very first guest on this podcast as well. So it's kind of full circle that you can come back 100 episodes later, but you also been here
And people are still
of
listening even
years. Yeah.
after I went on, huh?
I hope so. I hope so.
Okay.
If they listen to the whole episode, I'm not. I don't know, but I hope they do. But let's before we go into what we're going to talk about today, because the first episode we kind of talked about, the very first episode we were kind of talked about general outlaws and general life. Sorry, life in the Wild West, what that was like. But that's kind of what you do on your channel as well, isn't it? You go more in depth on what we did in the chat episode, but let's talk about your channel for a bit.
Okay. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean the original plan for the channel was to do what I call overviews, which is broad information about a subject in the Old West. And the reason I did that is so that later on I would have more material to get in depth on. So for instance, I could talk about Native Americans in a general way. And then later on, I could break it down into each different tribe or different warriors or chiefs in those tribes, those kinds of things. And quite frankly, I haven't done that yet, but that's the plan. So yeah, you start off with, that's how I'm doing it. Start off with a broad topic, narrow it down,
And this is a collaboration, isn't it? So in this episode, we are going to talk about outlaws and some who mysteriously disappeared and was never heard from again, and among others.
That's correct.
And what are you going to do about on your channel when this episode comes out?
Well, I actually pretty much you just mapped it out. That's kind of what I'm going to talk about is outlaws, lesser known outlaws, and of course, very famous outlaws that all of a sudden just seem to have vanished from the books. Where did they go? How did they die? Did they die? Well, of course they died at some point, but did they die back then when they said they were supposed to have died? Those kinds of things. Now, I've talked about that kind of thing before with people like Jesse James and Billy the Kid. Were they really, in fact, buried in their graves? Those kinds of things. But what I wanted to touch on was some of the lesser known gunfighters and outlaws that were part of their gangs. Maybe they had their own gangs that just disappeared. All of a sudden they got released from prison, they escaped, and nobody's heard from them again. Why is that? How does that happen?
So who do you want to start with? Who do you want to start begin open up this podcast
with? Interestingly, so let's go to a gang. I was looking this up after the Billy the Kid thing I did a few months ago, and I realized there were so many gangs that were involved with the Billy the Kid fracas. One of those was the Jesse Evans gang. The Jesse Evans gang was run by Jesse Evans, who was I wouldn't say he was a small time outlaw. He was mostly a rustler, and most of those guys were rustlers, including Billy the Kid. But the Jesse Evans gang was actually pretty big. The neat thing about that gang is that it was an offshoot of another gang that was much bigger that ran in Texas called the John Kinney gang. So I guess all these guys were just, floating around, and, they would maybe split off if some of the people got captured or killed and form their own group of bad guys. But the Jesse Evans gang was evident. They were hired by the Murphy Dolan faction. And if you know any Billy the Kid history, the Murphy Dolan faction were the ones that were against the regulators. They were the Irish mob, as it were, in Lincoln. I'm sure that I'll be yelled at for calling them a mob. They're not a mob, but they were the faction. And of course, the British faction was the McSweens and all those, and Billy the Kid. But they needed guns, so the Murphy Dolan faction actually hired the Jesse Evans gang so they'd have some gunfighters. In that gang were people like Pony Deal and Curly Bill Brocious from Tombstone fame. Now, I'm not sure Curly Bill was involved at all in the Billy the Kid thing, but he eventually was involved with that gang. And so was Pony Deal. Pony Deal was a lesser known outlaw, just like Jesse Evans, who was involved with both the Billy the Kid thing and the Tombstone thing. OK Corral. In fact, Pony Deal, did you ever see the movie Wyatt Earp?
Yeah, well, a few years ago, I think, but it's been a while now.
Right.
It's quite long, so it's not like a movie you
Oh
kind of
God, yeah,
go
it
and
is.
sit and sit this
Well,
in one watching.
if you were able to stay awake to the end of the movie, at the very end of the movie, Kevin Costner playing Wyatt Earp is standing on the deck of this ship in Alaska,
I
and
think
this
that
guy
it's ironic because that's kind of my favorite scene. I kind of love that scene when that kid comes out and says that was my father. I think it was from my
right.
father. Yeah,
So, right, his father or his uncle or
uncle.
whatever,
I think it was uncle or something.
uncle, yeah, and he was talking about O'Rourke.
Mm.
Well, O'Rourke was actually um, that story is not exactly true the way it was said. And actually, Pony Deal, the one I was just talking about, that was part of the Jesse Evans gang, Pony Deal was credited with killing O'Rourke because O'Rourke was credited with killing or having something to do with killing Johnny Ringo, who was part of the Tombstone fracas. And in the movie Tombstone, Johnny Ringo was played by Michael Biehn. So, he's that one that Val Kilmer shoots against the tree, if you've seen it. Anyway,
Yeah.
yeah. So Pony Deal is one of those that, and my friend Dan and I talk about this a lot. He was one of those that you wanted to have in your gang because he was an enforcer and he was essentially an assassin. However, his loyalty only ran so far. You know what I mean? He was loyal to you, but he would get out if the getting was getting bad. If it was getting rough, he would get the hell out of there. He was smart, and he sort of stood in the shadows and did his job. And then when he was done with his job, he usually went and hung out with his friends. And Jesse Evans was very much the same way. So those guys were probably never became famous because they never wanted to become famous. They wanted to become the ones in the shadows.
So they kind of
You
played
know,
it smart, in a way, right? They
they
kind of
did, yes,
we
they
don't
did
want too
because
much exposure because then we would have to hide all the time, and that would not be very good. Well, for business, we got a name, but we sure we would have to hide all the time, and we can make as much public appearance as we would like to.
correct, right. I think that they could see the writing on the wall, and instead of just sticking it out and going, "Oh, we're tough outlaws, we're going to stick it out," now they said, "I'm out of here."
Mm.
And Pony Deal, and I think Jesse Evans were very much that way. Pony Deal, we don't know what happened to him. He went to jail in New Mexico, and he escaped, and he was recaptured, and he stayed there until about 1887, and then after that, we don't know what happened. So
Did he just
that
go off the drains? Is that the theory? Like
went off the
he
grid,
was
right?
done.
So
He was done with an outlaw life. He did. He had his excitement, and he wanted to get just a
there are
normal life.
stories, there's hearsay about him being killed in a gunfight, but there's no historical documentation about it. Same with Jesse Evans. I believe he sort of disappeared. Supposedly Jesse Evans resurfaced back in like 1938 or 1940, something around there. But nobody could verify if it was him or not. So what it's sort of the same thing with Billy the Kid, except Billy the Kid was famous. A
But
lot of
that's
people
quite
say, "Oh,
good
Billy the
though
Kid
when
wasn't
you
killed."
manage to have this outlaw life and you are just able to kind of retire. If that was the case, that's quite a good gig. And I assume that you didn't get too much attention and you're just able to retire and decide that I'm out of here.
Well, so that's an interesting concept. Do you retire, or do you love the adrenaline rush? Do you love the action? Do you love the bad boy quality of it? And do you just leave it until you get killed? That's the question. A lot of people have said, well, if Billy the Kid survived, why didn't he continue on being a wrestler? Well, exactly. All these guys, if they had continued to live on, wouldn't you think you'd heard about them later on? Robbing a bank, stealing a horse, something like that? Or did they get killed? Or did they, in fact, somehow decide, oh, well, I'm done being an outlaw. I'm just going to quit and go open a store,
I mean, that makes sense though, right? That you kind of want to be off the radar like you said earlier. Like you don't find somewhere far away from where you were robbing and killing as possible, and you just live the life as quiet as you can, with outside of the law. Sorry,
True, but
inside the law, but
we
out
we
of
have
the.
a we have a we have an adage here in the U.S. A leopard doesn't change his spots, meaning you're imprinted with that, and you can't just change that easily. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not even sure if I believe that, but I can
Are you
tell you
talking
that some
about
of these
back
guys were
then or back? Right, you're talking about back then because you kind of
all
fell out of.
all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. I'm talking about back then as well. So let's look at somebody like Jess. Well, let's look at Billy the Kid or Jesse James. Jesse James. Let's look at Jesse James because Jesse James basically after the Northfield raid, almost his entire gang was wiped out. He basically had to start fresh. Well, that would have been a perfect opportunity for him to quit. It's not like he needed more money. He had money. He had places to go where people would protect him and hide him away, but he didn't do it, did he? He went and robbed more, and then eventually somebody shot him. One of his own gang members shot him. Why? Did he just not want to leave? Did he like it?
It's been a while, so I'm a little rusty on the Wild West, to be honest with you. But was
Oh,
there a reward on Billy, or was that Jesse James? No, I think that was Jesse James that had a reward on him
both
when
of
he
them
was
did.
But he was
Yeah, both
the
of
guy
them.
that killed Jesse James, right? He was branded a coward afterwards. He didn't get the reward as he was
Right.
hoping
His
for.
name was Robert
Yeah,
Ford, and he was one of his gang members.
yeah,
Yeah, and he was branded a coward because he shot him in the back of the head, just like the guy that shot. Well, Bill Hickok was branded a coward because he shot him in the back of the head.
yeah. I couldn't remember if that was Billy the Kid or Jesse James. Yeah, when you mentioned it, it
And
was
well,
yeah.
Billy the Kid was not shot in the back of the head. He was shot in the front, but it was in a dark room, and
Mm.
and Pat Garrett was sitting there with a gun trained on him. So
He was
not
branded a
really a whole
coward
lot
too,
different.
though, wasn't he? He didn't get as much recognition as he was hoping for, did he?
Who's Pat Garrett? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, he wasn't branded a coward, I think, because
he just didn't get the fame that he was hoping for. I think.
right. So the problem is that Billy the Kid was he was causing problems. He was rustling. He was wanted, and I think that probably a lot of people just agreed that Billy needed killing, as they say, and Pat Garrett just happened to be the guy. However, you lose a little bit of respect when you shoot somebody from ambush. You just do.
Yeah.
And John Wesley Hardin, famous gunfighter from Texas, same thing. He was shot in the back of the head in a saloon by a lawman, but it was nobody was in court. Basically, they dropped the whole thing, and nobody really liked Hardin. Hardin was a hardened killer, as it were. Nobody really wanted him around. He represented a bad time in history of Texas, and so having him killed, or not having him killed, but him being killed was okay. They were all right with that. That's good.
Yeah.
That's fine. I think same with Billy the Kid to some extent. Jesse James, I don't know. I think
He was kind
people,
of favored by the Southerners, though, because he was looked as a
yeah,
rebel, right? He was fighting for the
exactly.
Northerners because they lost the Civil War and was a part of the guerrilla
Yeah,
campaign
he
in the
was
Civil War. So he was
right.
more or less a hero to at least to the Southerners.
I think Southerners did regard him as a certain, a lot of them protected him. He had places he could go pretty much throughout Missouri and in that area that he could be hidden away in if he needed to. So once again, I say, well, why did you continue to rob trains? Why'd you do that? Why didn't you just give it up? You had the money. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
I read his son did write a biography on him. I think it came out in the 1920s or something. I don't know if you read it. Jesse James, My Father is called.
I have not read that. I should probably read.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about how he was almost arrested himself because there was a bank robbery happening at the time, and he was talking about. I think if I remember it right, it's 2 years ago. So I read it now, but he was talking about how he was convicted because he was the son of Jesse James, and there was a bank robbery, and that was what Jesse James was known for, and how he was at the wrong place at the wrong time, I think.
So they
And
just assumed it was
yeah,
him.
yeah, it was kind of he has to have the genes in his
Because
blood,
he's
right?
the spawn
Yeah,
of evil.
yeah. And
Evil
I
outlaw.
think he got, I think he did. I don't think he got convicted if I remember it right, but there was a whole trial about it in Jesse James. My father in this book about in real life afterwards, because they thought like his father was a famous outlaw and he has to be an outlaw himself. There was a train robbery. I don't remember when it was, but he was apparently they thought him guilty.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm surprised, but so, um, but yeah, that's a really good example. So that's an example of, hey, your father was bad, so you must be bad as
Mm.
well. Same. That's why I have a hard time believing that some of these people lived in obscurity and grew to old age. I find that hard to believe because,
Maybe I did, but I'm gonna rob that damn train.
yeah, exactly. So it's more likely that somebody like Pony Deal was shot in a gunfight or from behind, getting into trouble. Jesse Evans also. But then again, you're not wrong. It's very possible one of them said, okay, I finally made enough money stealing cows and selling them, or horses and selling them, or robbing banks. Now I'm going to go and buy that ranch I always wanted and change my name to Bob. It's very possible that happened. It's a matter of fact, there is a rumor that Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid did not die in Bolivia, or maybe one of them didn't die in Bolivia when they was not shot by a bunch of federales. There's a rumor that Butch Cassidy at least, went back to America in the early 1900s and lived under an assumed name, never robbed another bank or a train again.
And
In
that,
fact, his
yeah.
sister claims that they had a conversation. So I don't know.
And
Maybe
Wyatt
I'm
Earp,
wrong.
we talked about him in the very first episode as well. He retired to Hollywood. He survived. He was an outlaw, and he killed, and he survived into making movies in Hollywood, didn't he?
Well, yeah, Wyatt Earp wasn't really known as an outlaw. He early on he did some things that were illegal and he got caught for them, but he wasn't really an outlaw. He was actually known for um, basically being a gambler and a fight. He used to judge prize fights and things like that. He was an opportunist. He was really looking to try to make money all the time. Um, so he did a lot of those jobs that he knew would earn him money, running saloons, running whorehouses, those kinds
Yeah.
of things.
He was married to several prostitutes too, weren't he?
He was married to one. Well, so the one named Maddie, the one that died because she overdosed on drugs, because he left her and she went to Pinal, Arizona, and she was a prostitute there, and she overdosed on drugs way after Wyatt Earp left the state. She was his common law wife, which means that after 7 years of living together, I guess they figured they were married. It must be an American thing, I guess. After 7 years, you're considered of living together. You're considered married to some extent. So, or you can claim that, I guess. So they were. He had her as his common law wife. So they weren't really married.
Oh, right, yeah.
And then Josie, the Josephine Earp, I don't really know if she was a prostitute. I know she was an actress. She might have dabbled in prostitution a little bit, but yeah. As far as I know, he's only really married to one of them.
So we spoke of some few outlaws, and we mentioned some big names. And what we would consider big names. Is there anyone else you want to share with us here today?
Well, there are plenty out there, and I'd like to talk about them more when I do my video. But I think it's kind of interesting that so many of these guys, there's so much mystery around their death. And I think that's really because we don't want them to have died the way they did. No, we don't want Billy the Kid to have been shot in a dark room. We want him to have survived and lived to tell another tale, you know? Butch Cassidy, the same way. We don't want him to die in another country. We want him to die in a hail of gunfire in America, or maybe that's not it. Maybe it has nothing to do with another country. Maybe it has to do with the fact that we just don't want them to die.
Yeah.
I don't know. You know, Jesse James, I don't know if you knew this, but Jesse James, there was another guy that came out and said he was Jesse James and that the guy in Jesse James's grave was not him. So the governor, I believe, of Missouri, okayed, this is back in the 90s, okayed digging up Jesse's body and running a DNA test and found out for sure that Jesse James is in his grave. So the guy that claimed to be him is not him, and Jesse is indeed in his grave. They can't do that with Billy the Kid, though, because Billy the Kid's body was washed away in a flood, so they don't know where he is.
And speaking of Jesse James again, what I'm keep bringing up the book about Jesse James, my father, because there's something that what I don't remember the name. I'm poor to remember the names. I'm afraid, but the guy that shot him, what was his name again?
Bob Ford.
Bob Ford. That's it. Yeah, I think he wrote that he was working with his grandmother, the kid of Jesse James, one day. He was quite young back then. And Bob Ford he comes along and he actually sees them and recognizes them. And I think he asks for forgiveness to his mother and family, to his grandmother and his family, I think, when they meet them. So I don't remember if she did forgive him, but I think that was something he wrote. I think he wrote this that he did meet him later on, and that is he asked them for forgiveness for killing his father and her son.
Oh, that's interesting. No, I didn't know that.
I'm pretty sure. I'm not certain, but I think that's what happened. I think she wrote it. But it's 2 years ago.
I would imagine that she probably did forgive him. You know, I can only imagine that. But once again, he's still got to live with that.
Yeah.
Now, he was shot in Colorado, I believe. Bob Ford was also ambushed. He was shot with a shotgun in Colorado. He was a saloon keeper. He owned a saloon. I think it was in Colorado, pretty sure. But, about 15 years later, 10, 15 years later. Yeah.
But it seems to be a common theme, though, that people meet up Billy Kid and meet up Jesse James both been shot in not such an heroic way, to put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that, and I think I mentioned this one of the times we talked, is if you need to kill a famous outlaw, your best bet is to do it from an ambush or from behind, because there's a reason they're famous. There's a reason that they have a reputation, and you don't want to face them because you may not be good enough. So John Wesley Hardin is a good example of that. John Wesley Hardin was so good with a gun, nobody wanted to face him because he practiced all the time. Nobody wanted to face him. So John Selman, for whatever reason he had for killing John Wesley Hardin, came up behind him and shot him in the back of the head or the side of the head, something. Anyway, shot him from behind because he didn't want to take a chance. Same with Bill Hickok. Same with the Jesse James guy. Nobody wanted to kill them in a face-to-face fight.
I mean, I don't blame them, though. If you had opportunity to do a duel with either of them, you probably it's not like the scene in A Million Ways to Die in the West where you can just out-talk them.
Yeah,
but,
and shoot him with a rattlesnake bullet. Yeah.
It won't be like that, though. You just fuck him, I just am dead now.
Right. It's funny. You should mention that. Have you ever seen a real fencing match? Like on the Olympics?
As far as I'm aware, no.
No. Well, so watch one once, because you're gonna think it looks like an Errol Flynn movie or a Pirates of the Caribbean movie, and it's over in seconds.
I believe.
I mean, literally, like sometimes you can't even tell who stabbed who. Which changes your outlook on everything. And every movie you've ever seen about swashbuckling makes you think that. Same thing with gunfighting. I think these people were smart and said, um, oh, I'm not going to let this guy even get a shot at me.
Mm.
If I feel like he's going to threaten me or try to kill me, I'm going to just kill him.
Mm.
I think that's really what it was about. I don't think two people stood out in the street and had a conversation while one of them
Yeah.
slowly inched his hand towards his gun. No, I think the other guy would have been like, "That's it, you're dead." Boom.
Yeah. Let's talk about duels actually, because I want to bring. If you were a famous shooter and I was, but we both were, let's say decent shooters, both of us, and I challenge you to duel because we argue about cards. Let's say cards that you cheated, for example.
Okay.
How what would be, even if you were better than me, would I still have a chance to
Sure.
get you, even if you were like brilliant shooter? Would I
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
still
You would have a chance because first of all, you have to understand that depends on the time frame too. So let's say that you and I are doing this, and it's the 1860s, early 1870s. Maybe we don't have cartridge revolvers yet. Maybe we still have cap and ball revolvers. You know what I mean by cap and ball is you have to load it with powder,
Yeah.
put in a ball, and then put a cap on the back to ignite it all. Um, those guns were were not perfect, and they could not go off. You could get what they call a chain fire, which is rare, but it could happen. There were a lot of things that could happen. You could have a misfire. Probably a lot more of that happened. So you had that chance that that person would have a misfire, but did you want to take the chance? No.
No.
Yeah, you if you knew that I was cheating and I was a famous gunfighter
Mm.
and you wanted to get you'd probably say, you know what, I'm done. Fold your cards, reach in your pocket
Yeah.
as you're walking away from the table, pull out the gun and shoot me. That's what you'd do.
I want to
That
bring
way
up a
you
million. Yeah.
you killed the famous Santee. What's that?
I want to bring up a million ways to die in the West again, because
Mhm.
in when he has the bad guy Liam Neeson is having a, I don't remember his name, but when he is having a gunfight, he is always shooting at two, right? It's a one, two, and then he shoots in the movie. But would that be looked at as a cowardice if you did that in a real gunfight in the Outlaw of the
Oh
West?
yeah. So
If you shot him two, like that's what you were known for. He's a coward. It never.
absolutely. So you're using the term dueling, um, which actually goes back a long time before the Old West.
Mm.
And it goes back to Europe. It goes back to Scandinavia. It goes back to everywhere where they used to use swords and men would duel each other, right? Because
Yeah.
you've seen the movies, and they would typically have what they called a second and a second person. So if I was going to duel you, I would have a second and I would name that second. You know, I name Bob as my second. Okay. So what happens is if for some reason something were to happen that was illegal, Bob could take over for me, you know, um, or not. Something bad would happen, then Bob could take over for me. But there was also a judge there, and the judge would say, "Look, you're gonna count to 10, whatever the case would be, right? You're gonna count to 10, turn around and fire. If you counted to 5 and turned around and fire, then if you missed, then I had a right to shoot you dead. Um, you lost a lot of respect if you lived through it. Most likely your family would shame you. You know what I mean? Because cheating was not good. That was an act of cowardice.
So it wouldn't be like this scary, like you see in again it's a comedy, but still, but that wouldn't be like
Well, once
being
again, we're
fair
talking about
that way.
the old west. Now, dueling practice is not really around anymore. There's very little law. So ultimately, if something like that did happen, um, you would probably, if you said 1, 2, we'll shoot on 3, 1, 2, and you shot the guy before 3, um, you would probably be taken to jail, and you would go up before a judge, and you would say, "Hey, it was self defense. The guy was trying to kill me, so I did the best I could," and the judge would probably let you
So
off.
pretty much the same as today then.
Yeah, yeah, probably a little bit like today. I don't know.
But we talked
To,
about how some outlaws disappeared and some got shot cowardly in the back or in a dark room in this
right.
episode. But were there were there many outlaws that were actually arrested and unless was able to escape, or like you see in the movies, or and how many would be hanged actually by being caught as by bounty hunters or being just plain simply hanged when they were arrested?
So it's interesting you should say that. There was a gang down in Bisbee, Arizona, which is just southeast of Tombstone. Yeah, I think it's southeast. Anyway, um, and there was a famous event called the Bisbee Massacre in the late 1800s, late 1880s, where a gang of guys, mostly cowboys and rustlers, decided to break into a store down there and rob the store. Now, why a store, right? That doesn't make any sense. But the store had a safe in it, and the safe is where they kept the mine payroll for the payroll to pay all the miners that worked in the mine that supported the town. And they were going to rob that payroll. The trouble was is that I think they had the day wrong. I think that's how that story went. They had the day wrong, or there wasn't the mine payroll wasn't there. The problem is that they decided to shoot their way out of the situation, and they killed a bunch of people, including, I believe, a pregnant woman. So they posse went out, caught them, and hanged them all. One of them was considered to be he wasn't actually in on the actual robbery, but he was the owner of a saloon where they all went to, and he was their friends. So they thought he was the ringleader, and they lynched him in Tombstone. They lynched him from a telegraph pole before they hanged the other guys. So
Lovely
yeah,
way to die.
isn't that horrible? Yeah.
But something we didn't talk about much. We talked about the outlaw side of this, and I want to take a look at the outlaw side as well as we did a little bit now. And I don't remember if you talked about this in the very first episode because it's all 2 years ago now, actually. And what was it like for a bounty hunter? How risky was it as being a bounty hunter as in the Wild West, trying going after the outlaws? How successful were the bounty hunters usually?
So the bounty hunters, like in the games that we play and the movies we see, were not really the bounty hunters of the Old West. Bounty hunters in the Old West were not. I don't want to say that they walked around and just did like Clint Eastwood, where he would capture somebody and get paid for it. I think it was more of a. I think it was less a career and more of an opportunity to just make a little bit of money, and in some cases, you made a lot of money. I can't remember his name. Tom. He was a mountain man, and he actually caught a Mexican bandit who had been on a killing spree, and he decapitated him and put his head in a bag and sent it back to the fort and got paid for the bounty. That's probably the most interesting bounty hunter story that I have. A lot of them did take their life in their hands because, for instance, if you have to somehow fool the person. Do you ever watch that? Some of the American TV shows, gosh, I'm so embarrassed by some of them, but like Dog the Bounty Hunter and those kinds of things,
One
where
episode, I
they,
think, yeah.
right, one episode's enough. They have those situations where they try to fool the person into thinking that they're not a bounty hunter, right? Oh no, I'm just here to get a cup of coffee. Oh, I'm here to deliver. Hey, you just won something, and here's your check, here's your reward, and then they go in and get the guy. So a lot of the times that's what they had to do in order to infiltrate these gangs or to win the people over enough so that they could get them. So it's very dangerous because if you make one wrong move, they'll kill you.
So how were these bounties put up? Was it like we see in the movies and games like Red Dead Redemption 2 where they put up on the show's wall, like here's a bounty for $10,000 if you catch him. There you are, the money is yours, dead or alive. And how often was this dead or alive thing case?
Well, the dead or alive thing was definitely real. I think most of the time they probably wanted you to bring him in dead, so they didn't have to spend the money to go through a trial and all that.
I mean, you lose
Um,
honor, sure, but that's
right. But the bigger problem was, and this is kind of a sad thing, but the idea of there being wanted posters posted all over the sheriff's office or on the streets, that never happened.
mm,
Um, just like it doesn't happen today. I mean, here in America, you can go to a post office and you can see people who are wanted by the law, but they don't have a bounty up for them. So,
mm.
it's
I mean, I
it's
wouldn't
kind
go
of,
out there immediately if I see somebody wanted. I would stay a hell away from there.
yeah, yeah. I think more often than not, the people that got the bounties were the lawmen.
Mm,
You had lawmen back then that weren't just sitting behind a desk in a sheriff's office. They were
mm,
they were out and about. They had to go get these people. You had Pinkertons. Pinkertons were also considered bounty hunters in some respect because they went and changed their look. Um, they would go undercover and use disguises so that they could get their man,
mm. I
and
mean,
they collected the bounties.
how often would it be like we see in the movies and again in the games like, hey, you're new here. The sheriff just quit. Here's the badge, and you're the new sheriff of town. Do you not
um,
care at all, or is that just pure Hollywood fantasy?
I think that's mostly Hollywood. However, there is a town out here called Canyon Diablo. It's gone now. And Canyon Diablo was apparently such a rough town. They claimed that they had a sheriff that was hired in the morning and he was dead by the afternoon. He was dead by lunch. I think that's the term. And so, yeah, they would go and get another marshal or sheriff
I don't
to
know
fill his
experience,
shoes.
but I'm sure it'll be a fine job.
Right. But why would you want the job? If you live in a town where all they do is kill the law, why would you want the job? I don't know.
So this was so silly. I don't know, but and again, I want to refer to media here. As we kind of see this in Westworld, how this place, how it really where the girl, one of the prostitutes, team up with the outlaw in. I think it's one of the first episode of Westworld.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
did this occur as well that the prostitute could team up with the outlaws to get some extra cash or some help them out because they didn't really care?
Well, I don't think that was a practice. I think that if anything, you had people that so a lot of the unfortunately a lot of those women back then they were making pretty good money as prostitutes. Unfortunately, a lot of them were drug addicts. Some of them were diseased, so they got sick and died. So I would imagine that a lot of them probably didn't ride in outlaw gangs like the movies depict.
Mm,
Um, they would make more money by hiding away the outlaws. There was a
mm,
couple of madams in Texas that did that. And when I say hide away, they probably didn't hide them away so much as they let them frequent the business,
mm,
you know, and it was okay if they had different names, that kind of thing. So I think
mm,
it was sort of a network. There was sort of, in some respects, maybe a network, and brothels were involved somehow
mm.
with those networks.
And how easy was it for the sheriff to be corrupt? And was bribery a thing back then where they could bribe the and again we see this in Hollywood too, I think. It's been a while since I've seen a Western movie. I'm ashamed to commit, but I confess, but could the outlaws bribe that you don't turn a blind eye? We come riding in and rob the town tomorrow. You just don't turn a blind eye like it didn't happen.
Yeah. I don't know how, I don't think that was that common. There are a lot of outlaws that ended up, well, we'll go back to Billy the Kid again. Um, I can't remember his name. There was a guy that ended up being a lawman in Medicine Lodge, Kansas, and um, Henry Brown, and he was a member of, I believe, Billy the Kid's gang, the Regulators. But anyway, he was sort of an outlaw, but they hired him as a lawman because he was good with a gun and he knew all that stuff. However, he and his buddies decided to rob a bank, and they got caught. Their lawmen got caught, and they strung them up, killed them all. So actually, he got shot with his own rifle, but the other guys got strung up and killed. And that happened in other places too, where the actual lawmen were corrupt. They were part of the. I want to say it was Wyoming or Montana. There was another guy that did that,
And we do see
and
this in we do see this in Django too, right? In the video very beginning when he comes to this town and the sheriff turns out to be the outlaw that he's looking for.
Yeah, I think that, you know,
I think that's the case.
You get corrupt law and people in power all the time, and I think it's just a matter of what they do. I would imagine most of those guys pulled the strings more than went out and robbed banks. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you see in the old black and whites. Okay, Randy, you go out and rob that bank and bring the money back to me. You know, that kind of thing. Yes, sir. I'll be back before sunset. So,
but something and again, I'm taking a lot from media here, and as a fan of, we talked about this before recording in Red Dead Redemption 2. You got this group of outlaws with Dutch and Arthur and all the gang, and you see they have such a good chemistry in the gang, and even in campfire life. If you don't really play storyline, you see them converse with each other, have parties sometimes, and they genuinely seem to have a good time. Was it like that if you had an outlaw gang, or was it like they really kind of barely tolerated each other, or what was the camp life like in real life for an outlaw?
you know, that's a good question. I imagine that there was a brotherhood, just like there was in the Red Dead Redemption game. The only thing that bothered me about the Red Dead Redemption game is it was like a small village that they this
Yeah,
outlaw
exactly.
gang.
Yeah.
They had a cook. They had a lady that walked around. I don't know what she did. You could get things fixed for you. I mean, it seemed to make it seem like it was this whole outlaw camp.
Was there women involved in the gang's camp, or was there like no, just men there?
I would imagine that. Well, Bill Doolin, who had a gang called the Doolin Gang, Bill Doolin had two girls that rode along with him called Catalani and Little Britches, and they hung out with the outlaw gang. See, that's the problem too. Is you get women involved in a gang. Well, somebody wants that woman. At some point, somebody's going to want that woman, and that woman's going to be a problem because
there's gonna be fighting over that woman.
there's going to be fighting going on. So typically, I think it's probably best to not have women in your gang. You know. But as far as the camaraderie and the brotherhood, I think that really did happen. It also depends on the gang. You know, I'm sure. Did you ever see the movie Young Guns?
Never heard of it. No.
Okay, Young Guns was about Billy the Kid. Starred Emilio Estevez and Kiefer Sutherland, Lou Diamond Phillips, and a million other people. They were friends before they became a gang, but they weren't really, you know, backslapping, pool shooting buddies. They worked for the same person. So there was some animosity, there was some rivalry going on, but they had a common goal, and the goal was to take out the Murphy Dolan gang for killing their boss. That was their main goal.
Yeah,
So I think that when you get a bunch of people with a main goal, you tend to look past some of their differences, you know.
Speaking of this, and I want to bring up Red Dead Redemption game again. And we see they have this rivalry. I don't remember the name of the other gang, but it's this other gang there. And they have this rivalry. Did that happen as well? That there was a rivalry between other gangs, other outlaw gangs?
You know, sure there probably was. That's something I want to look at when we do the video. Is some of the if there was rivalry, because typically it's not like there were gangs in the West. There were plenty of gangs. Some of these gangs, though, didn't operate in the same region. In fact, most of them didn't operate in the same region. You know, so I think that you probably didn't have gangs bumping into each other in the middle of a heist or something like that. Maybe in
kind of like
Texas.
the Monty Python scene in Life of Brian, where they bump into each other in the tunnel with this other group, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or did you see the movie Maverick?
No.
There's a movie in Maverick. There was a part in Maverick where they had. Anyway, not important. But yeah, you get those kinds of things in movies, and it's funny when you see it. Oh, it wasn't Maverick. It was the Apple Dumpling Gang. and Don Knotts and Tim Conway were trying to rob a bank. And at the same time, his old gang came in to rob the same bank at the same time. So it's kind of funny. Did that happen in the Old West? Doubtful, but it's always possible. I know that there was instances where people would rob a bank, or not a bank, but they'd rob a train, and then they would throw the next gang off because the gang was going to rob that train, but they couldn't because this other gang robbed it the night before.
Yeah.
So, anyway,
was it a lonely life to be an outlaw? What did it happen that it was really kind of a lonely life?
yeah, well, you have to figure you're always on the run, and it's you're sleeping outside most of the time. You're looking over your shoulder to see if the good guys are coming after you. I would imagine it's pretty lonely. Yeah.
I mean, you had a group of people, but still, you didn't have any family. You didn't have a house to come back to. You couldn't go back to the house where your family was, right? Because they probably were looking for you there.
Right. So what would happen is a lot of these gangs, if they were smart, a lot of these gangs would basically split up right after the heist or the robbery or whatever it was. They would split up, and then they would obviously meet back at a later date. It would be easier for a posse to catch you if you're all in one group. Butch Cassidy used to have horses stationed when he knew he was going to rob a bank or a train or whatever. He would have horses stationed at certain places so that the horses wouldn't get tired out. He could, stop, get a fresh horse, and then go and get another fresh horse. And then he and his gang would either go to the hole in the wall or they would split up. I would imagine a lot of these gangs. I think that's what happened with Jesse James. Is his gang typically split up. It was smart to do that. But anyway, yeah, it's got to be a lonely life and a very scary one.
We talked about women in the camp before, but did it happen that some outlaws kind of what would happen if you met someone, right, and you said I want it out? How easy was it really to get out of a gang? Like, was it like some gang members today where you? I don't know anything. I might be wrong here, but where it's not like, let's say you're Yakuza, you can't really get out of the Yakuza once you're in. Like, I'm done with this life. I have a family now. I want the normal life that everyone else has. Was it easy like that to just get out of the gang life if you wanted to?
Yes and no. So the problem, I don't think it was one of those things like the mafia where you can't leave because if you leave, they'll kill you. I don't think it was that scenario. Although in some, I'm sure it was. Probably Jesse James' gang, they didn't want you leaving because if you left, you would have too much information. So, but with some of these others, like Jesse Evans' gang, if you look at the list of all the people in the Jesse Evans gang and the Kinney gang, 6 out of the 15 of those guys were never heard from again. They left when the gang broke up. They dispersed and did the whatever.
You must have had some story to tell your kids though when you're around the campfire or in the house in the afternoon.
Right. Or would you? That's the question. If the gang you were with was known to be murderers, do you want to tell your kids about that? That you murdered people?
True.
Do you think they'd really like that? I don't know. It's tough.
True.
I get people on the channel who comment and they say, hey, my great grandfather was, Jesse James or Billy the Kid or whatever. So does Butch Cassidy, whatever. They say these things and they tell me these stories. And sometimes they say, I'm very ashamed. And I say, well, why would you be ashamed? Well, because he killed innocent people. Okay, well, but the truth is he's part of history and he goes down as being a famous outlaw. So you can be ashamed if you want, but the truth is you have a famous person in your lifeline, in your family tree. So a famous outlaw from the Old West. So it's something to be, I don't think it's something to be ashamed of. It's all water under the bridge now. But
I mean, we talked about this in the first episode as well. And in the very first episode, it's hard to believe it's 2 years ago already. Tomorrow, actually, it will be 2 years since.
Oh, wow.
We recorded this the 16th October, and this won't be out until 1st November when you hear this. But tomorrow, when we record, it will be the first time we're recording the first episode of this podcast, the 17th. So happy anniversary!
Happy anniversary.
Well, but
I don't
we
have a
thought
ring. Where's my ring?
I'll email you one. Do you
Thank
want
you.
diamonds or do you want how many carrots?
I don't like carrots.
Fair enough.
Maybe some celery. Could you send me some broccoli?
Yeah, sure. I
Maybe
will
some
do that. I will
asparagus.
do that.
I
But
really
yeah,
like asparagus. Makes a bad ring though. Anyway, go
I'll
ahead.
do that. Yeah. Anyway, we talked about how White Earp ended up going into Hollywood movies, and we talked about how the Wild West was really kind of more or less 30 years after the Civil War, right?
Yeah.
So how I mean, for those who do you have any? We talked a little bit about this earlier, but was there many who we know other than Wyatt Earp who kind of lived into the 30s? You mentioned one that lived into the 40s, but was there more that lived into that era, into the 20th century?
So yeah, so the Old West, a lot of people say it ended in 1899 because they read it in a Wikipedia article or something. But the truth is, and actually when I did the Red Dead Redemption video, a lot of people said, well, it wasn't in the Old West because the Old West was over by then. Well, it wasn't, because
Yeah, you said this in
Arizona
the first episode that was 1912, really.
yeah, it's closer to 1912. So yeah, I don't want to repeat myself. So but yeah, it's closer to 1912. I mean, if you think about it, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were probably the last of the really big outlaws, and they died in 1908 potentially. Later on down the line, you had some Old West outlaws who had, you know, not escaped from prison. They were released from prison finally after doing, and they went right back onto the outlaw trail in the 1900s. In fact, one of them, I think, I can't remember his name, but one of them, you know, didn't use a horse anymore to rob a bank. He used a car, an old Model A Ford or Model T Ford or something. So, and he was killed. But so yeah, I think you have a lot of these people, like Wyatt Earp, who did survive it, and Virgil Earp, his brother. Some of these people that survived the Old West, you know, I think that they had to come up with another way to make a living.
It wasn't like, oh, it's 1912, the Wild West is over, let's just pack our bags and go back to normal lives.
No, I don't think it was like that. I think it was like, oh boy, you know, there used to not be cars on the street. Now there are. Used
It's
to not be a street.
A little bit faster than the horse.
What's that?
They're a little bit faster than the horse.
Yeah. Why do I need a horse anymore? The thing poops and eats all the time, and I have to make sure it's shoed. All I have to do is put liquid into this other one. Why don't I just do that?
Thank you so much for coming, and it's been a pleasure to have you on to talk more about the Wild West. And hopefully you'll be back on episode 200 if that's ever
yes,
comes out.
I hope so. Much success to you.
Thank you. And before you go, why should people? Of course, you should watch, but why should people watch? From your words, why should they go to your channel?
Well, if you want to learn about the Old West history, it's a good place to do it. We also talk about how people like me and some of the other people that I know relive the history today to make it more available to people who do reenactments or living history or gunfight shows or movies. So,
and you were working on one right now, aren't you?
Yeah, I just wrapped with one. Yes.
And this is and like we said this in the beginning of the episode, this is collaboration with Arizona Ghost Riders, your channel name. So if you want to check out more on this Life of the Outlaws, please check it out. It should be available the first Saturday of, I believe that's when you post videos of November.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
I'm looking very much forward to it, and thank you for coming back again. This has been Will That Aged Well. We are available on Instagram and Will That Aged Well. Speaker fans on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. And if you have Apple Podcasts, please consider leaving a review. That would help us out a lot. Santi, do you want to take us out again, like always?
Okay. Thanks for listening. And please like, share, and subscribe.
And I'll see you all down the trail.
Really, Erlend?
I'll see you next time.